Hanania Show is brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News Newspaper, the Middle East's leading English language publication, with print and online editions in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, France, Japan, Pakistan, England, and the United States. Listen to live radio every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, and Ontario, Canada. Or watch the live broadcast on Facebook.com/Arab News. The Ray Hanania Show is rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on Thursday. For more information on the radio stations, live Facebook broadcast, and podcasts, visit ArabNews.com. And now, here's your host, columnist and U.S. Special Correspondent for Arab News, Ray Hanania.
And it's Wednesday, August 10th, 2022, and I am your host, Ray Hanania. We're broadcasting live in Detroit, Washington, D.C., and tomorrow, Thursday, we'll rebroadcast in Detroit at 7 a.m., and we'll rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on the big 1080 AM radio, which covers all of Northern Illinois. So we're building up a following there. I got two great guests, but my first guest and segment one of my favorite guests. I love talking to this guy. He's so smart. He's Lebanese, and it always reminds me of great Lebanese food whenever I talk to him, and I want to get that kibbeh naya. Nobody makes it anymore the way they used to years ago. I don't know why. But our guest is Ambassador Ed Gabriel. He's the president and CEO of the American Task Force on Lebanon, and he was recently appointed, I believe this week, by President Biden to the U.S. Institute for Peace. Welcome to the show again, Ed. It's always great to have you on.
Thank you, Ray. It's good to see you. And I'm told the best kibbeh nai is in Detroit at the Sod meat market. So, please visit the Sods. Yeah, they make great kibbeh nai.
You can't find that every place anymore. It's hard to get. And you know what else? It's hard to find stuffed grape leaves with lamb. A lot of people don't use lamb. They're using hamburger. What's happening to the world, Ed?
Well,
we're going upside down.
We're going global, Ray.
Is that it?
Yeah.
We're trying to make other people happy, right? Instead of making ourselves happy, we're selling to Americans, Europe, whatever.
Well, you know how the Phoenicians were.
Yes, they were great people. Believe me, the Phoenicians, Lebanese, all of them. Listen, still, Lebanon. Why do I have this feeling that Lebanon is still mired in stagnation politically and economically and facing a worse crisis in the near future? I'm worried about Lebanon. What's going on?
Well, you should be. Recent statistics put Lebanon in the bottom 4 of the worst economic countries in the world. It was just a couple of decades ago, it was in the upper third, or a decade ago, it was in the upper third of countries on the income scale. The World Bank says that it's one of the worst economic disasters since 1850, possibly one of the worst 3 disasters. So you have a lot to be concerned about. I was just there a couple of weeks ago, was there for 3 days. I had 23 meetings representing the American Task Force on Lebanon and Lebanese of Americans of Lebanese ancestry. And we met with, the top leadership of the country with a tough message. And that was, you're in charge of a country right now that's going off the cliff. It's going to be a beggar state by next year, and you will have been responsible for this unless you can do some things in the coming months to help stave off the impending disaster. I can tell you more about our meetings if you'd like, but a lot to be concerned about.
Yeah, there was a time when, I'm telling you, maybe in the 80s and 90s, Lebanon was phenomenal. Even when I was there, I think in 2004, it was doing really well. Beirut used to be the jewel of the Middle East, and the way things have turned out. I mean, is it because regional problems like conflict with Israel? Is it bad politics? Is it the religious divisions that continue to tear Lebanon apart? What's caused this? I feel like I'm Ozzy Osbourne singing the song "Going Off the Rails on a Crazy Train." That's how I feel about Lebanon, and I love the country. I don't want to see any bad problems for it. What's pushing this?
Well, I'm reminded of the Stones. I can't get no satisfaction when you go there. But I do want to say one thing. The Lebanese people still are phenomenal.
Yes, they are.
Quite amazing people. And let's give you a little bit of good news. I mean, they had election in May, and actually the reform candidates, the opposition candidates, the change candidates took the majority away from Hezbollah and its allies. So there seems to be a movement there by a progressive group of parliamentarians that want to make change. Now, that's a long way to go, but it's these phenomenal people who care about their country are doing their best under the circumstances. There is regional pressure on Lebanon, but that's making an excuse. Quite frankly, the reason why Lebanon is where it is because of corruption. There's a massive amount of corruption in the country, and it really has to come to a halt if there's ever going to be any progress. The International Monetary Fund has come in with a proposal accepted by the government so far, but the government has to implement a number of reforms that will reduce corruption and address the needs of the people. So we'll see how that happens. On the regional level too, it's tough. You got Israel to the south, Syria to the east, Turkey, and the other countries that are really playing out a number of their issues in and around Lebanon. Having said that, one thing has come up, and that is a negotiation between Lebanon and Israel. Two enemies are trying to settle their maritime border dispute. We were encouraged that they're moving in the right direction there. And if they do, it'll send a great new signal that Lebanon can work with some of the tough characters in the region and find peaceful solutions.
Isn't it a simple thing where you just divide a borderline in the water? I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Maritime, the two countries come together at a border, you draw the line out, you go out, how far? Maybe, 50 miles, 100 miles, and then beyond that, it's international waters, right? What's the problem?
There are technical concerns that you have when you draw that line. But yes, you're right. If there was nothing under the sea, you probably could find the technical answer. The problem is, and the good news is, there's oil and gas underneath that line. So who's going to get it?
Right.
And I think they're finding a win-win solution from everything I've heard. And that's why it's been so difficult. There's also a land border between the two countries. And over the years, they've actually reduced the spots on the land to 13, what they call reservations, where they have to deal with them. And all but 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 are significant. So, who knows? I mean, two countries that are not at peace with each other could maybe find a peaceful border, which would greatly help help peace in the area.
Now, with all that fighting down in Gaza, and I know, people say, why are you blaming Israel? I mean, my feeling is that the Israelis have been targeting Palestinians since the beginning of the year. They killed an American journalist there. They haven't done anything. And then all of a sudden, their government collapses. They have new leaders. And the one way Israeli leaders like to exercise their authority to their voters is to hit at an Arab, target. And Gaza is the easiest. So they attack Gaza. They target Islamic Jihad. Now Hezbollah says, you do the same thing in Lebanon and you're going to regret it. That ups the tension, doesn't it? And Lebanese don't even have Hezbollah isn't even the voice of Lebanon, technically, the government.
Well, look, the hostile talk by either party is not going to help the situation there. And the talk got so difficult in the last month that I think it actually helped speed up the negotiations on the maritime border. Even Nasrallah came out and said, this is your last best chance for the next several generations. And so part of the reason for closing this deal is to get away from that tension. And you're right. I mean, Israel has to come to realize on Gaza and the Palestinian issue, they can have a one-state solution or a two-state solution. But to have a two-state solution, they've got to enter into good faith conversations with Palestine to find a win-win solution. Otherwise, they're going to get a one-state solution, which more and more people are moving towards. And right now, one-state solution would have the Palestinian people over 50% of the population. So it's really in Israel's best interest to rethink how they're operating in the Palestinian arena. Having said that, terrorism by the Hamas doesn't help this situation. Right now, they need quiet in the region and know that they've got a partner. Israel has a partner to talk to. So, you know, both of them have to come to grips with this thing on a win-win solution.
Does the balance, you think, rest on internal problems in Lebanon or regional pressures that impact Lebanon as the cause of their problem? I mean, where is you? I guess you can't pin it down specifically to one thing, but where's it coming from?
You can. Lebanon has two problems. One is corruption, and the other is Hezbollah having arms. You can't have a country where you have a militia that can push itself around in the region over the heads of the Lebanese armed forces. Thank God the Lebanese armed forces are becoming much stronger. What they were 10 years ago and what they are today is a big difference. So no, I don't see this mainly as a regional problem anymore. The Lebanese armed forces are protecting the borders and the sovereignty of the country pretty well. I mean, they got more work to do. So really what this comes down to is a parliament that will tell the corrupt leaders, enough's enough, you're out. We're going to vote for reforms and change, and we're going to implement those through a good governance structure to make change. So those are two issues that really are causing the problem today. The IMF program, the International Monetary Fund program, is a possible solution out if they react to it and pass the needed legislation in the next 2 months, just before a presidential election. And the parliament will have something to say about that. Will they elect a president that is reform-oriented, or will the same old guys elect the same old guys?
So, and go back over the elections a little bit for me. I know that we just saw parliamentary elections, as you pointed out, where reformers, new faces, independents have seemed to at least taken the majority, at least pushed out some of the old, Hezbollah-driven, coalition out, at least below the majority that they used to have. What's next in terms of the elections, the presidential elections? When are those? Have the dates been set?
Okay, so you're right. In May, they had parliamentary elections, and the agents of change, the people of change, reform, and in the opposition took away the majority from the Hezbollah allies. But it's very close. It's not unlike our U.S. Senate, where, in the parliament, 5 votes can mean the difference between who wins and loses, between the reformists and the old guys. So they now have to, as a next step, the parliamentarians have to come together in coalition and compromise to make sure that they can hold a majority seats together to elect the next president. The next president will come to power in November, but they can begin the process as early as mid-September. So the process could start early by the parliament beginning deliberations to elect a new president. And on the first vote, I think they need a 2/3 majority. If they don't get that, then it goes to simple majority. And of course, the question will be, will the parliamentarians that are in the opposition come together enough to make that change happen?
Is there anything that you see that would change the dynamics where Hezbollah really is the big powerhouse in Lebanon, that would change their influence and I don't know whether they willingly do this, but to actually merge back into the government and not feel like they have to be the voice of regional confrontation with Israel. Well, what does that take? Is that even possible to even think that could happen?
Well, a couple of things. One is, what is the U.S. and international policy towards Iran? And if they close on a JCPOA, will they also close on an agreement to stop regional terrorism and missile technology? So that's number one. There are other things that can be done. The stronger the Lebanese armed forces become, the more sovereign Lebanon can act against the militias. The other point is that a reform-minded parliament can elect a reform government and a reform president, which will have reform policies and really change the attitude of those that have been in power and stop the corruption and move forward. Hezbollah is a political party, and they are part of the fabric of the country, whether some people like it or not. The question is, they need to put down their arms and make sure that they operate as a political entity within Lebanon, not become a terrorist, not continue their terrorism across the region. I think the way to handle that is to go back to point number one in our relations with and discussions with Iran.
And I listen, if I were the Israelis, and I think this is true, they don't fear anybody as much as they fear Hezbollah. And in a way, it seems like Hezbollah is the shield that prevents Israel from attacking Lebanon the way they did back in the 90s, that invasion that they launched under Ariel Sharon. And when I think about it, though, it gives Hezbollah this perception that they're needed to stand up to Israel. If there were peace in the region and Israel were to make peace with the Palestinians, and who knows if that's ever going to happen, but if there were peace, then wouldn't it be that the need for Hezbollah would diminish, and maybe there might then be a movement to bring some peace between Israelis and Lebanese? Because I know the Israelis probably treat the Lebanese worse than they treat anybody. You can't talk to a Lebanese person if you're Israeli. You could be charged with treason. You know, the feelings that are so difficult with Lebanon, I assume because of Hezbollah. How do we move? I mean, is it even feasible that we can move in that direction where one day you don't need Hezbollah to be the big military gorilla in the room to keep Israel at bay?
Hezbollah has said that when there's peace between Israel and the Palestinians, there's no need for them to have arms. I met with the Shia Mufti recently, and he actually reiterated that belief. And I asked him, at what point do you see them putting down their arms? And he said exactly those words that you seem to indicate. So they say that. Do they mean that? Who is their godfather in Iran, and what is their regional mission? Israel, yes, Israel did feel the effects of their invasions with Sharon and in 2006. But I think their calculus is not that they're afraid of Hezbollah. I think their calculus is that the international community will come down hard on Israel if they go and have a scorched earth campaign in Lebanon. So I think they're going to be very careful about getting into that quagmire. So in that sense, I think they're based upon their own calculations as compared to being afraid of some actions against them by Hezbollah.
Talk to me a little bit about the presence of Christians. You know, that when I was young, my parents Christians from Jerusalem and Bethlehem. The whole family lived there, but over the last 4 or 5 decades, the Christians have fled. Israel. They've fled the occupation. There's a big political war. Whose fault is that? They're saying the Arabs abuse the Christians. My feeling has always been the Israelis abuse the Christian. I've landed there. I can't even get it because I'm Christian. But what concerns me is that Lebanon, outside of that small pocket of Christians that used to be in Israel and the West Bank and Palestine, Lebanon is the only real presence of Christians outside of the Coptic Christians that are in Egypt. And my feeling has always been that has been a factor in how Lebanon has been defined over the last few years and why it's being pushed into this conflict.
You're absolutely right. And right now there's a brain drain and there's a mass migration. 40% of the doctors, I'm told, have left the hospitals. Professors are leaving the universities. There's a time when Lebanon was known in the whole region and beyond as the education center, as the health center. And now they're being decimated because of this corruption and this regional instability. And people who can leave, are leaving, unfortunately, in greater numbers among the Christians, I believe, or in greater proportion among the Christians. So this is a real worry, and it's going to change what Lebanon really is if we don't bring this to a halt very quickly. The U.S. understands that. They have put a lot of support into the university system, American education university system in Lebanon, Lebanese American University of Beirut, and other schools. They care about the private sector schools, which are so involved in teaching children in Lebanon, and the health sector. So the U.S. gets it, and as well as France and other European allies. How do we stop this migration from occurring? It's really sad, Ray, and I fear, remember what we talked about at the beginning of the show, I really fear that we're headed for a welfare state if these politicians don't wake up in the next 2 months. And it'll be sad because people who can leave will leave. It's a 70% poverty rate, more than 50% unemployment rate.
And you were very close to President Biden during his campaign. You worked on the campaign. He had a lot of support from the Arab community. There was hope that things would change. And I understand politics. It's not easy. Once you get in office, nobody can stand up to the Israeli lobby. So, but I do get a sense that Biden wants to do what he can to bring fairness to the Middle East. It's sometimes the rhetoric kind of leans toward the Israelis more than it does towards the Palestinians or some of the other Arab countries. But what kind of influence can Biden have? And are you worried about these midterm elections shaking things up more? Will the conservatives taking over the House and maybe the Senate, would that impact the Middle East in a negative way, or would it be a positive thing? How do you interpret all that? What happens in U.S. politics? How does it impact Lebanon and the region?
Yeah. We have been quite amazed by the bandwidth that the Biden administration seems to have with all the problems in the world, and with a change in our global strategy occurring before our eyes with the Russian-Ukraine war and what's going to happen as a result of the outcome of that. But the Biden administration has been able to focus on Lebanon, and as you've seen, the region. Tom Friedman said a few months back, we may not care, the U.S. may not care about the Middle East, but the Middle East cares about you, and they will drag us back no matter what. In Lebanon, the appropriations for Lebanon just last year was over $700 million. I think it's in the top 5 recipients of foreign aid. the Lebanese Armed Forces is really been trained up by the United States Armed Forces. And the Department of Defense has said it's the best fighting force in the region. The United States and their diplomacy in Lebanon have been very clear with the leadership there and saying, you're getting no more money, and we're not going to support you unless and until we see reforms that are accountable. And the diplomacy has been really upfront. President Biden's visit to Saudi was tough, but I think we're going to see the outcome of that in the weeks and months ahead. I think two things are very important for the region, Ray. One is America must ensure that Russia does not succeed in its efforts in Ukraine and the region. It cannot. If it does, America will be really hit hard globally by other allies and countries. They're watching what we're going to do with Russia, and that's going to affect the Middle East. It's going to affect the Gulf countries and whether or not they trust us and work with us in the future. So I think that's really number one. Number two, I believe the Biden administration has to be clear in letting people know that we have a new global world order happening, and we're going to count our friends closely, and we're going to need your help. And if we don't have your help, don't think that we're going to be there for you if you're not there for us. They have to be very clear in that regard. And that will take time to unveil itself, because you don't want to threaten people. You want to show through your actions that betting on America is a good thing. Long term, they should be betting on us.
You know, you always answer my questions. Any issues that you think that we should talk about that I haven't brought up? It's not all negative. Lebanon is still, I'm telling you, when I think of Lebanon, I can't forget how beautiful it was and is, and how it can be. So I think that has not changed. It's not eroded. Lebanon is just a phenomenal, beautiful place. And it just would be nice if all these problems could get stripped away so they could rebuild themselves. Because one of my most favorite places to visit outside of Jerusalem was always Beirut. Just a beautiful place. What else is going on that maybe if I didn't touch on?
No, just agree with you. I took a drive through Lebanon in the mountains recently when I was there, and I was just blown away by its beauty in spite of the torn down infrastructure. And I said, you know what? This has everything that Switzerland has and more. Plus, it has an unusually wonderful people. I mean, that combination should put Lebanon in the top 5 countries, the most admired, the wealthiest, the most giving, the best educated. It should be there. And I think it'll come back, but it's going to take a generation, and it has to start in the next 2 months. And I hope the Lebanese leadership understands that. Surely many parliamentarians do, and some of the leaders. We were encouraged by our talks, quite frankly, with the government leaders this trip.
And then, of course, do you think everything hinges on the elections in November then in Lebanon?
So I think there are 3 things that we'll be telling in the next few months. And we can also talk about our elections. I forgot to mention that. I think that if they pass the necessary legislation on the IMF, that'll be one positive signal. If they close on a maritime border with Israel, another big signal. And 3, if they elect a president that addresses the needs of the people, reform president, within a month or 2 of November, it will really begin to turn around the country. If any of those 3 fall by the wayside, it's going to be much more difficult. And we have our elections in November, as you alluded to and mentioned. For Lebanon, I don't think it's going to change a thing. I think that we've seen bipartisan support across the board and great leadership. You know, we have a Lebanon Friendship Caucus, the U.S. Lebanon Friendship Caucus, and it's chaired by Darren LaHood, Republican, Daryl Issa, Republican, and Debbie Dingell, a Democrat. And across the board, we see great support for Lebanon. So I don't think we see that changing. And I think we need to get back to where we were before the Gingrich days. And that is where the Congress supports the president in the conduct of foreign policy rather than hanging our laundry out. I remember as a Democrat when I walked away from office and the Republican came in, Margaret Tutwiler replaced me. First thing she said to me, she said, Ed, I want you to know politics stops at the water's edge. And I think we have a Congress that understands that, and surely a president that's steeped in it.
All right, Ed, listen, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Listen, if you can get Daryl Issa on, you and him, come on the show one time. I'd love to get his voice, on the radio. He's a tough guy. Sometimes the Republicans, they don't like to deal with the media because a lot of the media is so biased. But I think he's a very influential Arab American voice. And I think it'd be great. Maybe you have some influence over there. And congratulations for being appointed to the U.S. Institute for Peace.
Well,
many years ago, that was a rough place. But over the last few decades, it's changed. And it's not surprising to have somebody like you being appointed to their membership, which I think is a great asset for them.
Thank you very much, Ray.
You deserve it, Ed. Listen, Ed Gabriel, my guest, always happy to have you on, and do what you can. Let's put a producer hat on, and I'd love to bring you on, and maybe Daryl Issa will feel more comfortable.
I'll send Daryl a note right now.
Do that, please, because I'd love to talk to him. I think his voice is needed. And Arab, he doesn't shy away from being Arab American,
no,
but he doesn't wear it as a badge on his shoulder or his chest. But I know Arab Americans would love to hear from him more. So
he's not a step away from his roots, I'll tell you.
That's what I think too.
Neither is Darren either. Both of them have been remarkable.
Yeah. All right. Ed Gabriel, my guest, the president and CEO of the American Task Force for Lebanon, recently appointed by President Biden to the U.S. Institute for Peace. Thanks, Ed.
All right,
we appreciate you joining us. We'll talk to you later. I'm Ray Hanania. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Abdul El-Sayed, who ran for governor in 2018 in Michigan, and get some perspective from him on what's happening among Arab Americans and Muslims in the United States. I'm Ray Hanania. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you. At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
Clap your hands if you're happy and you know it and you really want.
5-year-old Lila and her mom are on their way home from Grandma's, singing Lila's favorite song.
Happy and you know it, move your feet.
A few blocks away, 25-year-old Dylan is visiting friends at a small party. He finishes off his last beer,
later, skater,
gets in his truck, and starts for home. Mom and Lila turn onto Maple Street.
If you're happy and you
So does Dylan.
If you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, shout hooray, hooray!
Every 50 minutes in the United States, someone dies in a crash involving a driver impaired by alcohol or drugs. If you're impaired and you know it, don't drive. Drive sober. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Al-Majid Katranji. And at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263. The Ray Hanania Show is brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News Newspaper, the Middle East's leading English language publication, with print and online editions in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, France, Japan, Pakistan, England, and the United States. Listen to live radio every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, and Ontario, Canada. Or watch the live broadcast on Facebook.com/Arab News. The Ray Hanania Show is rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on Thursday. For more information on the radio stations, live Facebook broadcast, and podcasts, visit ArabNews.com. And now, here's your host, columnist and U.S. Special Correspondent for Arab News, Ray Hanania.
And welcome back, everybody, to the radio show. I'm really honored to have this next guest on, Abdul El-Sayed. If I were to think of anybody who understands politics better in the Arab community, he's at the top of the list because I think he understands politics. He ran in 2018 to be governor of Michigan, didn't win. But when you listen to him, when you hear what he has to say, his politics makes sense. Abdul El-Sayed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ray, it's my privilege to be with you.
Oh, yeah. No, listen. And we're happy to have you on because, the Arab community sometimes is a difficult community. We're physically here, but mentally we're back home sometimes. We think politics the way they think back home. They don't adjust to the system. You got to change. But changing doesn't mean you give up what you believe, right? You run for office as an American, you win, and then you push not just your issues, but the needs for the Arab and Muslim community.
There are a couple of reactions I have to that. The first is, a lot of our communities come from places where the opportunity to voice your positions, your perspectives is muted at best, and can wind you up in jail or worse at worst. And so I think there's a real fear of truly engaging in the system, and sometimes that means that people just stay quiet, or it means that people engage in sort of a politics of clientism, meaning we have to find someone from outside of our community who's going to carry our interests. And, if there are other interests that trump those interests, then those are going to be the ones that they voice, and we're just going to have to put up with it. The other piece of this that I think is important is sometimes we allow our own squabbles that we carry with us to get in our own way. We forget that the world is a lot bigger than our communities. And so we carry our own, as they call it, the narcissism of small differences between our various communities with us. And that spills onto the canvas of our broader engagement in national politics. And sometimes that can flummox our best goals that we may have for ourselves. And so between those challenges, it can be difficult. And at the same time, our community's made really tremendous strides. And we've got so much more representation everywhere from, city councils in communities with large Arab populations to the mayorship in a community like Dearborn to representation in our national politics. Through a number of elected officials. And so there's a lot to be proud of. And so it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, no, it's great. Have you thought about running for president of the Arab American community? Because we don't have a leader. Let's be honest. Do Arab Americans have a leader? Because as you pointed out, sometimes we focus on the little negative things that we don't like rather than looking at the bigger picture. I wrote a column 10 years ago, and one sentence people get upset about, and they can't look at the bigger picture. Is that a problem that holds us back? Or is that just me, exaggerating my own issues that I face. How do we deal with problems as a community? Because it seems like the divisions sometimes are bigger than the unity.
Yeah, and I think there's a saying, and I'll say it in Arabic, just given our listenership here. إنما العلم بالتعلم وإنما الحلم بالتحلم, which is, verily all learning is by study, and all practice of forbearance is by practicing forbearance. And I think sometimes we forget that there is a bigger picture, and our ability to move forward means being able to have forbearance with one another for the bigger goal. And I think sometimes we make the perfect the enemy the good, and it interrupts our ability to come together and work together. And also, on the other side of that, there's a real frustration I think we have inside of our communities, because there are a lot of folks who put themselves first as implicit representations of the community in ways that have them compromising the best interest of the community in the process. And communities like ours have always struggled with this issue, and so it's a real challenge that we face. But I think you're right. Like we really do need to have a set of best practices in terms of being able to resolve our conflicts peaceably and thoughtfully without creating bigger and more lasting conflicts out of these what start as small quibbles.
Yeah, and I know that we can't all be like Dearborn. I interviewed Mayor Abdullah Hamoud last week. He was phenomenal. It was good to see somebody that smart who was concerned about the city, and at the same time being proud that he was Arab, but making it about being an American from Dearborn to help everybody, because that helps our community. Do we lose sight of that when we are successful as Americans, we automatically become successful as Arabs, don't we?
That's absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing, is that all of us are here when it comes to our ethnic and national identities as Americans. And our responsibility is to what's best for our country. Now, we believe that part of that implies a certain level of representation, that every voice needs to be able to be thought about, and every perspective needs to be engaged with when it comes to policymaking in our country. And so, that work toward mobilizing and organizing so that Arab Americans have a voice in our municipal, state, and national politics is important. And yet, all of that should be done with the best interest of our country and our country people at heart. The other part of that, though, is that oftentimes, we talked about this a little bit at the top of the interview, Ray, is that there is sort of a sense that that we also need to look out for folks who don't have a voice in their national politics. And folks can often think that these two ideals are in conflict, that we're either legislating with the best interest of America at heart, or we're legislating with the best interest of others at heart. But actually, we are best as a country when we stick to our ideals and we apply those ideals indiscriminate to what borders they happen to fall within. And so whether you're talking about human rights for people in America, an end to racism, access to fair housing, good healthcare, and a good job, or you're talking about human rights abroad in countries like China, or in Saudi Arabia, or Egypt, where my family comes from, or Israel and the rights of the Palestinians, that those ideals ought to be inviolable. And frankly, when we stick true to our ideals, both at home and abroad, we are doing our responsibility to our country people, and we're doing our responsibility as a country to the world. And so those two things are actually not in conflict. Frankly, I think they are mutually inclusive. When we legislate in this country for the well-being of people abroad, we get it right at home, and that means that our people are not sent abroad to die in wars that are fought over the rights of large corporations to take other people's natural resources, and that means that the kind of will that we'd like people to have toward the United States, the kind of hope and aspiration that our country has long intended to stand for, that those things ring true in the hearts of people outside this country. And that's for the best for people abroad and for the best for people here at home.
I've covered politics 45 years. I covered Chicago City Hall 20 years. 25 more years doing media and running elections. And the one thing I learned about American politics that makes it so impactful is that it's like a baseball game. Two teams fight with each other, and when it's over, they're friends. They don't enemies. They don't stay enemies like forever. You beat me. Do I hate you for the rest of my life because you beat me? It seems in the Arab community, we tend to do that. We want 100% and not consensus. And I think sometimes we need to understand the power of consensus over the idea that everything has to be 100%. I don't think that's ever possible.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we're more concerned with disagreeing with what someone else said than finding the opportunities to agree, right? And really promoting what we agree on. And I think that part of it is gotten harder with just the nature of our public conversation that's become so intermediated by, meaning operated through social media, which promotes the disagreements rather than the places for agreement. And so we tend to see a lot more of what we disagree with, and that just enriches our disagreement rather than trying to find and preach what we agree on, and hope that we can persuade people to come see it our way. And if not today, then tomorrow. And that implies that we're still listening, we're still talking, and we're still interacting with each other. But too often we find those points of disagreement, we use them as a pretext to end a conversation, and then we find ourselves down on islands rather than working together to build a unified voice for the well-being of our particular community, for the well-being of our country, and for the well-being of the world.
I think Mayor Daley, the former first Mayor Daley, Richard J. Daley, said it best when he said, we either hang together as one voice or we hang separately, weak and easily to be targeted. You're a physician, you're an educator. If you had the Arab community in your medical office on a scale and you were reading them the report of their health, what would you be telling us as a community across the country? And I know we're spread out, but it's not hard to see us. What would you tell us that we need to do to get in better mental, political, economic, and social health?
Number one, I'd say there's a lot of good things we are doing. And, we are a community that has a lot to be proud of. And there is a lot that, a lot of progress that has been made because of work like folks like you. And that is something that we really ought to be proud of. And at the same time, there's always more that can be done. In the first place, I would say, let's find the opportunities for agreement. What are those places that we all agree? And what does that agreement look like? And how do we make that the framework for where we go moving forward? The second thing I'd say is that rather than concentrating on identities, let's concentrate on the ideals that we bring to the table. I think it's important for us to come together as an Arab American community, and that personally is very important to me, as is my faith. And at the same time, both of those things come with a certain level of ideals that they imprint upon me. The ideal of hospitality, the ideal of hope and inspiration, the ideal of justice. And let's frame our engagement around those ideals. And then the third thing I would say is that the beauty of our community is in its diversity. And there is not one Arab American. In so many ways, I come from an Arab American community where, my Arab American identity is quite limited. I am Egyptian American. Most of the Arab Americans in our community are Yemeni American or Lebanese American or Iraqi American. There aren't very many Egyptian Americans. And that's sort of allowed me, because I quote unquote don't have an Arab American tribe per se, has allowed me to be sort of universally engaged in the conversations that folks are having. And unfortunately, what that has often meant for too many people is that because we tend to have this interest in our differences, is that if you're part of this tribe, you're not part of that tribe. And there's so much more we can do if we're willing to come together around our broader goals and our broader ideals. And if we can do that, I think the future is even brighter than all that we've already accomplished. But let's not forget, we've accomplished a lot. And there is so much that we have to be proud of.
I think my dad brought that with him in the 1920s when he came here. The old way of thinking, that he's from this one group, it's tribal, he's not the same as somebody else, or other people are not the same. And we haven't broken from that. It seems like we're still embracing, we've confused our heritage and culture with these practices that really are not Arab or cultural at all. Take a step back and first of all, are you planning on running for office again? You got my vote. Yeah. You got my vote.
I appreciate that, Ray.
Not just because I love the name Abdul El-Sayed. I think that's a great name. And the more we present your name to Americans, the sooner they're going to get used to it. And the sooner those things don't stop them from stereotyping us. So when are you going to run? Have you thought about another office?
Well, maybe someday. I'll be honest with you. I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't still have that spark in me. And at the same time, I'm a father, and I found that you can either be a great public servant or a great private servant. And I think given how young my kids are, I still got a lot of responsibility to be a private servant and be the best dad I can be, the best husband I can be. And I think only in having done that and fulfilled that, can I be a really, truly great public servant. And so my own life circumstances have forced me to step back for a little bit and make sure that, I get to serve my daughter breakfast when she wakes up and tuck her in at night. And hopefully when she's a little bit older, both to understand that I'm gone, but also to understand why I'm gone, then that might give me a little bit more space to see if I can't take another swing at it.
What was it tough to run for office back in 2018? I mean, was it difficult? What was it like? I mean, when you look back at it, do you say, oh my gosh, why did I do that? Why did I subject myself to a fishbowl where everything that people don't like about me gets exaggerated and all the good things that you try to do get pushed aside or interpreted or minimized?
I'll be honest, right? The answer of why I never wavered on that. You think about where our country is right now and where one could see it was headed back in 2018 when I ran. And every day I'm grateful for the opportunity I've run. And the reason why I ran is eminently clear. It's not to say that it's not difficult to run. It's 18 months and I quit my job to focus full time on the campaign, which meant that I wasn't earning anything. My daughter was born in the middle of that campaign. So I missed all of her landmarks in those first 8 months, her first smile, her first, the first time she bit into a mango, the first time she crawled, the first time she walked. I missed all of those things. And I really regret that. But at the same time, I like to think that I was working toward the kind of Michigan and the kind of America that can embrace a little girl like her. The other part of it is that our politics, in so many ways, the system of our politics makes it so much more difficult to focus on the ideals that bring folks to our politics. It's very ossified. It tends to give a lot of weight to people who have been in that system before. And of course, the people who tend to have success in that system tend to have been in the system for a long time, which means that if you're a young person, if you're a person of color, if you're a person whose name is Abdurrahman and has sounds that come out of parts of people's throats they don't know they have, it becomes a lot harder to break in. And at the same time, that's the reason more people need to do it, right? Because it won't get any easier for people from communities like ours and so many other marginalized communities across our country to break in if we don't try. So there is a lot of work that has yet to be done. I'm grateful to have been able to take a good crack at it. And I know that my race has opened doors for a lot of folks inside politics and other folks who want to run. And I hope that I'll get the opportunity to come and finish what I started and get to serve again. But for right now, I'm just really grateful that I had the opportunity. And, frankly, I'm grateful to know that had I grown up where my father was born, my mother was born, there is no world where I would have been able to aspire to public office. And because I was born in the United States of America, because I got to grow up here, I do have that aspiration and I can actualize that. And that's something to be really proud of and thankful for. And it's preserving that system. That is why so many of us have to stay involved.
Explain your perspective and perceptions of President Biden. I know he has a tough job, and I recognize that there are pressures on him, political pressures, that sometimes are just impossible to push back. So sometimes as Arabs, we listen to him, we go, wait a minute, what, you're not being what I thought you were going to be, but he certainly is far better than what we had.
There's no doubt.
How do we deal with President Biden and what's happening with him?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I think he's a good-hearted man whose intentions are in the right place. I think he's had some real successes in office, and he's made some really courageous decisions for which he's suffered politically, right? The decision to pull out of Afghanistan, even though the pullout itself could have gone a lot better. The decision to finally pull us out of 20 years of war was an important decision, and the courage in doing that should not be undermined. At the same time, I do think that that his efforts and his intentions are one thing, and then the politics, the political process is another. And I think sometimes we pay too much attention to the individual, the personality occupying political power, and less to our role in shaping that. And so if we want different policies out of the president, if we want different policies out of Congress, then the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing for it? I've been to too many dinner parties where politics are discussed and the president is either praised or mocked, regardless of who the president is. And then you ask, okay, so what are we doing to shape their policies? And we act as if politics is something that happens in a glass house that we can't actually engage with. We see what's happening inside, but we can't penetrate the walls. When actually, the privilege of growing up in a place like this and being and living in a place like this is that we can influence that, and we have to. And so, whatever you feel about the president's politics, whether abroad or here at home, the question that we ought to be asking ourselves is, what are we doing to shape those politics? If we want better healthcare, what are we doing to drive for it? If we want better access to affordable prescription drugs, what are we doing to get there? If we want a more just, more human rights oriented approach to governments abroad, be they in Israel or China or Saudi Arabia or Egypt, what are we doing to make those things happen? And that really is the question that I think we really have to be focused on, rather than who the person is in power. It's how are we leveraging power around that person to move their politics and move their policy.
What would you say to Arab Americans out there and Muslim Americans about getting involved in politics? What do they need to do to be successful? What do you think?
Well, we don't have a choice. I think for a lot of folks, they think that politics, again, is something that happens independent of them, that they don't have agency here. And I would argue that not only is that not true, but the choice not to be involved in the process is a tacit approval of the things that are happening in the process. And I know that all of us have our gripes with the way the country's going, regardless of what that is. And so we don't really have a choice. And if we're serious about our frustrations, if we're serious about our commitment to America, the American experiment, and the future of this place, then we have to get involved. At minimum, that means showing up to vote and making sure that everybody around you, whether they're folks in your family or folks at your workplace or folks in your community, show up to vote. But then beyond that, it's also it's getting involved in organizing in a broader way. It's mobilizing the voice of the communities that you're a part of. It's donating to candidates and causes that you believe in. And I think that really has to be a big part of our responsibility. And then, lastly, the highest ideal of citizenship is to put yourself up for election to public office, to represent your community. And I am very heartened by folks who are participating in the political process in that way. And so again, there's a lot to be excited about and a lot to be proud of, but all of us have to play our part. We don't have a choice. And every time you've looked at something on television or read something on Facebook and you get frustrated by it, ask yourself, what am I doing to change it? Because we live in a society that doesn't just allow us to do that, but commands us, that really it forces us to take stock in what our role in this is. And remember, our democracy is one that's for the people and by the people, and the people include us. And so we have to raise our voice.
I wish we had a 5-hour Arab American radio show where we could talk about this in more detail. I have to please ask you to come back on the radio show again, where we can spend more time talking about this. This is your first time on the show. but I don't want you to be a stranger. You got a very important message that needs to get out to the community. And I think Arab American journalists have a responsibility to carry that and present it to the community. My guest, Abdul El-Sayed, he's a physician, a public communicator. What's your website if you wanted people to go to get more information about you? Which website?
Yeah, it's abdulelsayed.com, ABDULELSAYED. Go ahead and check me out on YouTube, youtube.com/Abdul El-Sayed, and then check out my Substack, my newsletter, abdulelsayed.substack.com. And then, of course, I'm on social media at Abdul El-Sayed.
All right, Abdul El-Sayed, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, thank you for listening. We'll be back again next Wednesday, 5 p.m. in Detroit, Washington, D.C., and Thursday in Chicago. I'm Ray Hanania. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you.